Hello, this is One Mana Left, and I was trying to get some sleep the night before league start, but, you know, sometimes it's the night before a new league, you're trying to get 4 hours of sleep, and a bald New Zealand man walks into your room, grabs you by your sweatshirt, starts shaking you uncontrollably, and says, "No sleep for you, you're poxed now." Well, here we are. So, a week ago, kind of as a fun project, I made a build on Mana Righteous Fire. It was kind of a joke, but more just like a proof of concept, just in case something wacky happened for 323. But the concept of the build was basically to use the good old-fashioned like Hierophant conversion between mana and energy shield to just stack a bunch of energy shield and do a bunch of damage. Because at the time, they'd already announced that they're changing the RF gem to get rid of flat damage and instead scale off purely your energy shield and life, which makes a lot of like the big ivory tower builds that have lots of energy shield incredibly powerful. So I made that as just kind of a proof of concept in case, I think based off what we had at the time, the life version that like Lance played in Crucible is probably stronger, but I think with actual optimization, this would not be far behind. But, in this video, this is before the gem change to have the double scaling, so this is like half the damage of what we were told it was going to have. But based off the builds I'm used to playing, this is a fairly low DPS skill. But people like playing Righteous Fire. It's got good mapping. But there's a couple problems with this build that I made in this video. One is my setup I have is incredibly expensive, obviously. So like this, what you're looking at here would not be a league starter. It's using a double set of Forbidden Flame Jewel, and like it's using Sanctuary of Thought as Guardian. So you're having to have the Forbidden Jewels. It automatically makes it like not a league starter. Like, so this whole thing's kind of a meme. But as I'm about to go to sleep tonight, what do we get? We get Righteous Fire of Arcane Devotion added to the game. Now, hang on a second. Let me pull something up here. So, Righteous Fire of Arcane Devotion has a couple interesting lines of text. It says, the first one that really jumps out is deals 70% of your maximum mana as base fire damage per second. Truthfully, this line is not actually that powerful because a proper mana stacker will end up getting about as much or more energy shield as you get life, or as you get mana. So this doesn't actually represent like a huge gain. Like, this only would represent a gain in damage if your character had like 4k life and 20k mana. But for the like either Guardian or Hierophant setups, this is not that good because, once again, this character in this video has considerably more energy shield than it has mana. Okay. But the other line of text that is insane is modifiers to spell damage apply to this skill's damage over time effect. There's a lot to unpack here. The reason that mana builds are powerful and the reason they do a lot of damage is because they have this post-it note that you can stick on your forehead, and it makes you do 2,000% more or increased damage. For spells, that's very powerful, but that doesn't apply to Righteous Fire. So Indigon, if you read it, says 22% increased spell damage for each 200 total maximum mana spent recently, up to 2,000%. So provided you have a good amount of spend, you get 2,000% increased spell damage. Okay, that's crazy because now on a mana stacking character that is able to handle that much mana with Indigon, you will get 2,000% increased Righteous Fire damage. That is a level of percent increase scaling that no other Righteous Fire build can come close to. The other thing I didn't realize right away is most abilities like this, like Battle Mage's Cry and Crown of Eyes and the Wand Mastery and Kinetic Blast, all that have spell damage applies to blank, it usually specifies only increases and reductions. This does not. It just says modifiers to spell damage. That means this works on more damage multipliers. That's insane. Because Pain Attunement is a freebie for 1 point pretty much. That's 30% more spell damage. This should work for Righteous Fire then. There's no reason it doesn't. Additionally, as Hierophant, you have Arcane Blessing, which gives 20% more spell damage, more spell damage while you have Arcane Surge. But this scales with Arcane Surge effect. So if you're taking this wheel over here, you have 20, 20, 10, and then based off the spent recently on this node, you have another 50. So these 3 points are 100% increased effect of Arcane Surge, on top of the 20 you already get for the Hierophant lead-up point, which makes this 20% more actually 44% more. So you don't do that crazy amount of Indigon spell damage. You do 1.44 times and then Pain Attunement. So you actually do that 2,000% times 1.872. There's other sources as well. For example, there is the Iron Will Keystone, which if you have a little bit of strength, this is going to be another, maybe a couple 100% fire damage for Righteous Fire. So I decided, let's make a POB on this for an actual real build, and let's try to make it somewhat reasonable. So remember how I said the other one isn't really viable as like a normal person build just because you're using Sanctuary of Thought, Forbidden Flesh, Flame. It's out the window, right? But the nice thing here is this doesn't depend on any of that. Like, all you need is like the base Hierophant package. No Forbidden Jewels. I made this POB just now with my week 1 Mjolnir build from last character. I took the gear that I had on day 7 of last league, and I am not the fastest leveler. I am not a full-time streamer. I'm not quite, father of 19 who plays 4 minutes a month. I'm not quite that extreme. I obviously play a lot, but I had this on day 7 as an absolute tortoise of a human being at leveling. And so, these aren't the craziest items. I picked them up from trade. Like, I'm not using a 3-rat even. I'm just using an agate amulet. These boots are craftable for like 2 divines. And then I switched out my weapon from Mjolnir, and I made this scepter. You can buy fractured mana scepters for like 5 chaos, and I just rolled it for 1 mod. T1 dot multi, which is a rare mod, to be fair. But I rolled it for only that 1 mod, and then just crafted strength int. This is a pretty generous scepter. So, okay. I used a couple other things. I'm using Shavron's Ring, which you might think, well, that disables your mana regen. How are you going to handle Indigon? We'll get to that. This isn't mandatory, I would say. I think you could run the double... you don't need the Shav's Ring, but they're not very expensive, and it's a good way to get a lot of regen. So if you're going to get the mana back the way I'm going to suggest here, this might be a good way to get the regen, because as you'll see here, my net regen positive's 3,000. With a different ring, it's like break even, but obviously there's other ways to get ES back. But I just threw in the Shav's Ring as a suggestion, because it's a pretty cheap ring. The only downside is it disables mana regen, but we'll get to that, because you have to spend a lot of mana here. The way most mana builds spend a lot of mana is Arcane Cloak. It's plain and simple. You need to get to 16,000 mana spent for max Indigon stacks. I Arcane Cloak, boom, I spent 23k, right? This is a standard super geared character, so don't pay too much attention to the amount. But what this does then is it triggers your Indigon stacks, which makes the cost of your skills ramp up really high. And then keeping that spend is pretty easy, and in most cases... you can actually gain stacks as fast as they drop, so you just keep that spend super high and just stay at 2,000%. That's totally doable for most mana builds. But you have to get that much mana back. The way a lot of mana builds handle this is Leech. So on Manaforged Arrows, you have all these attacks, you're a bow character, you have Leech, you have instant Leech, you get tons of mana back. On Mjolnir even, you don't run the instant Leech setup, you're not an attack build, but you're still running Cyclone, and you're just trying to do enough damage with Cyclone to cap your mana leech 20% per second. So, all sources of regen in this game are pretty pitiful. If you look at my actual mana regen on a pretty geared character, granted I'm not targeting it, but I only have 6.5% mana regen. So getting just a baseline 20% from leech is like a much bigger deal than your actual regen. But here's the thing. an RF character isn't really going to get leech. There's a couple ways to do it maybe, but you have to get your mana back somehow. So the creative way I kind of went for here is there's a different way. We're going to look at some of the other leaked gems here, or teased gems. Here's what I'm thinking of doing. There's a couple different brands this uses that this could work with, but this gem we got released yesterday is an Armageddon brand that essentially is just the Meteor Firestorm, because it doesn't have a duration. It just attaches and then boom. So this brand just goes off instantly. There's a mana-related mastery on brands that says recover 10% of mana when a brand expires while attached. So I believe this counts as expiring. If not, there are other options. You can run one of the new Penance brands that are potentially super short with Swift brand. There's a number of different brands that can do this with Swift brand especially, to where they only last, even default Penance brand, you can make them only last like a half second pretty easily. So if this interaction doesn't work the way I'm assuming, you can back up and use a Penance brand setup to basically just have like a cast when channeling that's cranking out these brands. And then every single time one of them expires after like sub 1 second, they just give you 10% mana back. And if you're using cast when channeling, you're using like 3 to 3.5 of those per second. So that's going to give you over 30% of your mana back per second. So I made this POB, and I'm using it with the +2 brand for 5 on a cast when channeling setup to have... I just threw in Penance brand, but like I said, that instant Armageddon brand might work for this. We don't know yet, but one of these options should work. And like I said, you don't have to use the Shav's Ring setup, but this pretty much negates the downside entirely, because you're just getting 33% mana per second based just off cast when channeling. And then you can use Scorching Ray as your cast when channeling, or you could, for mobility, use Cyclone if you want to be able to like pass your monsters, but there's a little bit of flexibility here to get your mana back that way. So the setup will go, you do damage with Righteous Fire, and then you just run around either like cycloning with brands, or you're just chilling until you get to something that has any reasonable HP, then you just Scorching Ray. And then you're just Arcane Cloaking anytime you get back to full mana, and Arcane Cloaks back up. So, like I said, the gear on this character is not that crazy. It's just a regular Ivory Tower. Ignore the Mana Bond enchant. This was something I paid like 100 Chaos for on the Mjolnir character. I just have the same Indigod in here. A regular Prism Guardian. I did not make that crazy a gear. This is my day 7 gear. Let's throw out a number and say this character's worth 30 divines. I'll link the POB. Maybe if there's something in here I'm forgetting that's worth a lot, it's not making that much of an impact, and it's probably something tied to Mjolnir. But I don't think I left anything in here worth a lot. Like, these aren't even that expensive on League launch. They're like 1 divine. But you don't even need the LA weakness. You'd actually do more damage not having Corrupt Gloves and just manually LA weaknessing, but whatever. Like, the other thing to note is Coruscating Elixir, if you're not familiar, does turn off Righteous Fire, but there's a number of ways to get around that. A pretty easy way is to just have the Eternal Youth right here, which makes it so that you're just constantly recovering life, and because your life's not taking damage, so it's always recovering. And this makes it so that you don't really have to worry about Coruscating turning life off. It's 1 point and it solves the problem. In that other video I did, I had this convoluted solution because I had my my keystone tattoo here and I didn't want to move it for the video. But this is the simple, easy fix. But let's just look at this. This is not crazy gear, like I said. This is 7 mil DPS with Righteous Fire. And to be clear, 7 mil with a Vol Righteous Fire setup is not that difficult to get. This is 7 mil with regular Righteous Fire. I'm not using some juiced up curse. I'm not using like a bunch of like fire traps or double curse. This is just I'm running around with a 7 mil circle around me. I put this in the POB to adjust the numbers to equal the new gem. So you'll notice this line in the POB because it's like, oh, well, he's cheating. No, this is what the new gem does. This is a combination of Pain Attunement and Arcane Surge, and this is Indigon. So 7 mil DPS plus like another 2 mil with Scorching Ray, whatever. You even get a little bit of shock. I'm using 30 because you have a big Arcane Cloak that's giving you like 2k flat lightning damage on a bunch of Penance brands going off. They'll be shocking some. I think a 30 shock's not unreasonable. On trash monsters, you'll get 50% shocks. On bosses, you might only get 30. But it is a lot of flat lightning from Arcane Cloak, so do not underestimate the shocks you can get on that. But I'll show this POB in the description. I threw this together pretty quick. Like I said, Chris came into my room and shook me at 1 a.m. and said, Connor, you're pox now. Hurry, the league's tomorrow in 12 hours. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to cook this, but I mean, I kind of know my trees for mana stacking. You know, I'm using the base package with like an int mana split. The strength int ones are super expensive on League Start. They're like 6 divines, but these are like 1 divine. The int mana ones are way cheaper than strength int, so I'm using double up on those. Using Iron Will, like I said. You could juice this up more with a Lethal Pride and get these numbers bigger, but I'm using a pretty minimalistic POB here. Just for fun, I'm going to end with something here, okay? I'm going to go back to the POB I had made from last league that I tried to put together for this video. Just because, okay, I usually do videos where I have, like, mirror tier gear. But this is one where, because we have a league start tomorrow, it's kind of useless to link that POB. People want an earlier game, easier to achieve POB on week 1. I make crazy mirror builds later in the league, but I try to have something achievable in, like, under a week if I'm going to link it, you know, right before a league launch. But let's just look at what this skill could get to, okay? So, you'll notice I have a decent amount of energy shield. This is like the mirror gear, remember? Okay. Let's just see what happens if I change one of these and add it in here. Oh, by the way, this is on Uber Pinnacle. Let's put it on Guardian Pinnacle. Okay. So this character was set up to do a ton of damage in, like, once again, like mirror tier gear. But what does this line of text do? Oh! 29 million. Okay. Yeah. In fact, I shouldn't unsuppress this for the Arcane Surge and Pain Attunement because this is still basing it off of a bigger energy shield, not my mana. So I'm actually just going to leave this out. Actually, technically, it'd be like 20% less damage over time. So, okay. But, like, that 23 mil is regular Righteous Fire. That's not Vol Righteous Fire. That's just regular Righteous Fire. Like, so yeah, this, if you look at, like, the Gigarf setup from Crucible, it gets to dot cap, which is 35.7 mil. It gets there with Vol Righteous Fire. This build could get to have passive dot cap, like just standing still dot cap. No Vol Righteous Fire. Like, actual just regular Righteous Fire dot cap. This took a skill whose benefit was it's a good league starter, and weakness was it had terrible scaling for endgame. And I know for a lot of the real early POBs and league starts for RF, it's probably nerfed. But the scaling potential, especially with this setup, makes it more in line with some of the crazier endgame builds. And you could actually use this setup now to make an insane endgame character. But, like, even in this, like, pretty achievable 1 week POB, this is not bad. I have all my plans for tomorrow to start Mjolnir, with Armageddon Rin and Mjolnir. I'm not 100% convinced. I'm pretty sure I'm still going to start Mjolnir. But this is really late for me to change my mind on something. But there's a non-zero chance I could go mana RF. We'll see. But I thought I'd make this video show how to build this way, and just basically demonstrate that this is the best version of Righteous Fire. And it's not close. This blows everything else out of the water. Maybe we'll see some Manarf out there in 323. I'll catch you guys tomorrow for League Start. See ya.